They told me the desert was empty, that no one could live out here. Not anymore. Not after what happened in '72. But every week I drive a rusted tanker down a road that doesn't appear on GPS, delivering water to houses that shouldn't have lights in the windows, but do. The homeowners never speak, never blink, and always take exactly 3 jugs. No more, no less. I tried to ask questions once. I made it exactly 1.2 miles back up the road before I saw my own truck, flipped over, crushed like a can, with something inside it still wearing my face. That's when I started following the rules. Because if I don't, they send it again. People think driving a water truck through the desert sounds boring. It's not. It's heat, and silence, and dust crawling under your skin. It's knowing that if you break down out here, it'll be days before anyone finds you, if they ever do. But that's not why I'm careful. I'm careful because of the houses. I call them houses, but that word doesn't quite fit. They're structures, standing at strange angles, like they were poured out of the earth instead of built. Some are squat adobe cubes, sun-bleached and crumbling. Others look more like trailers from the 1950s, long abandoned except for the faint smell of bleach that always hangs around the doors. And then there are the ones that don't fit any style, the ones with windows too small to crawl through, or chimneys that lead nowhere. There are exactly 13 of them, spread across a 40-mile stretch of cracked red sand, dry scrub, and forgotten gravel, and each of them gets 3 5-gallon jugs of water once a week. It's not city water. It comes from a deep well dug by some company I've never been able to trace. My truck's a relic, an old tanker that groans like it hates me, but it still runs better than it should. The dashboard has no make, no model, just a worn copper key and a fuel gauge that never moves. I once tried to fill it up. The nozzle wouldn't fit. First time I ever made the delivery, my supervisor handed me an envelope. No return address, just my name printed on the front in uneven handwriting, like someone who doesn't speak English wrote it by copying letters. Inside were 5 typed pages. Water drop protocol, R72. The last page listed the rules, 12 of them. No explanation, no context. Just do this, don't do that, and under no circumstances do the rest. Rule 1 was bolded, underlined, and repeated. Never knock on a door, even if they don't come out. I didn't take it seriously at first. Thought it was just desert superstition. Old-timers playing mind games to haze the new guy. But by the 3rd drop-off, I knew better. The first house is always the same. It looks like someone started building it and gave up halfway through. There are no windows, just a single wooden door and a slanted roof made of cracked shingles. I pull up slow, put the truck in neutral, and place the 3 water jugs on the porch. That's it. No ringing a bell, no waving, no calling out. The first time I waited more than 5 minutes. The door stayed shut. No one came out. I got impatient. The sun was already roasting the back of my neck. I figured maybe they didn't hear the truck. So, I stepped up onto the porch, and I knocked. Just once. Just a polite little tap-tap. It was like the whole desert stopped breathing. The wind died instantly. The truck's engine made this strange gurgling sound, like it was choking on something. Then the door creaked open. The man, or what I thought was a man, stepped into the doorway. He was tall, unnaturally tall, maybe 6'5", 6'6", and rail thin, like a scarecrow in church clothes. He wore a white button-up shirt and black slacks, both spotless, not a speck of dust on him despite the wind. But it was his eyes that made me backpedal. They were wrong, not glowing, not bloody, not movie monster stuff, just wrong in the way they were too round, too still, no blinking, no flicker, just 2 perfectly circular pits of polished glass staring into mine. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared. I stumbled backward, tripped on the steps, and hit the ground, scraped my elbow on a cactus. I scrambled into the truck and slammed the door. When I looked back, he was gone. The porch was empty. The jugs were gone. I didn't knock again. Not there. not at any of the others. The sixth house tests me every week. It's the only one with a dog. I don't know what kind of dog it is, something between a Great Dane and a wolfhound, but it sits by the front door every time I pull up, tongue hanging out, tail thumping the sand. It looks friendly, happy, even, like it's glad to see me. One day it limped up to me, favoring a paw, whined low, looked me straight in the eyes, and then it pawed at the door, whined again. I hesitated. I knew what Rule 1 said, but it was just a knock, right? Just enough to let someone know their dog was hurt. I reached for the door. The dog growled, not at the house, at me. Its lip curled back, tail stiffened, ears flattened, all friendly energy drained in a blink. I froze. My hand was less than an inch from the door. Then the door opened, slowly on its own. No one stood behind it, just a hallway lit by red light. The dog backed away, tail between its legs. It turned, looked at me once, then ran into the desert. I never saw it again. I left the jugs, drove off in silence. The next week, the same house had a new dog, smaller this time, different collar, but the same eyes, same behavior. I haven't tried to pet it since. Week 9 was the worst. There's a stretch between house 10 and 11 where my CB radio crackles to life. No matter what station I turn to, it always says the same thing. Water's not what they want, over and over again. In a child's voice, the 11th house is the farthest. It sits on a slope that used to be part of an old mining claim. There's no path up to it, just bone-white rocks and dead shrubs. I have to park below and carry the jugs up by hand. This time the door was already open. No wind, no movement, just wide open, like an invitation. I should have turned around, should have left the jugs and gone. But I thought maybe someone had passed out inside. Heat stroke, maybe they needed help. So I stepped forward, not onto the porch, not into the doorway, just closer. Then I saw it. Not a person, a shape. Something sitting perfectly still at the far end of the room. Its arms were too long, its fingers dragged against the floor. It had no face, just stretched skin where eyes and a mouth should have been. It twitched. I ran. Didn't grab the jugs, didn't secure the truck. I drove with the door still open, the tires kicking up hot gravel. Back at the depot, I found a new envelope in my locker. Same uneven writing. Inside was a note. You approached the threshold. One more step, and you would have been taken. This is your only warning. The next morning, the 11th house had a new door. Steel, reinforced. No handle. I don't ask who lives in those houses anymore. I don't wonder how they survive without electricity, food, or contact with the world. I just follow the rules, because this desert doesn't tolerate curiosity. And when something in the dark learns your name, it doesn't give it back. There's an old desert myth that the heat makes you see things. Mirages, tricks of light, water on the horizon that isn't real. But out here, the things that appear don't shimmer. They cast shadows. They breathe. By the 3rd month on the route, I knew each stop by heart. The exact bend in the road where the sun would reflect off House 3's rusted fence. The greasy stench of sulfur that always hit before I reached the one with the broken satellite dish. I could have done the route blindfolded. So when I crested the ridge on week 12 and saw a new house sitting between stops 7 and 8, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't like the others. It was nicer. Too nice. Clean white paneling, green shutters, a porch swing that looked freshly painted. There were actual flower pots on the steps, filled with something that looked almost alive, which made no sense, because nothing grows out here except sunburn and regret. Still, there it sat, perfectly placed between 2 homes that had never had neighbors. I stopped the truck, checked the list again. 13 homes, always 13. This one made 14. The truck hummed beneath me, the vibration strangely louder than usual. I sat there for a long moment, watching. No one came out, no signs of movement, but a flag rippled gently on the porch, red and white, but not American. The pattern didn't match any country. I recognized. The longer I stared at it, the more I felt a dull pressure behind my eyes, like my skull was trying to push my brain away from the image. The front door creaked open, just a crack. At that point, every instinct I had screamed at me to drive on, but the protocol weighed heavy in my back pocket. I unfolded it, read Rule 2 again. It hadn't changed. Do not deliver water to any house, not on the list, even if it looks occupied. I checked the list once more. The new house wasn't there. Not listed, not numbered, not acknowledged. That should have been the end of it. But then I saw the girl. She stood in the window, maybe 10 or 11 years old, thin with a head of dark stringy hair and skin too pale for the desert sun. She didn't wave, didn't call out, just pressed a single palm flat against the glass and stared at me. Something about her felt familiar in a way I couldn't place, like I'd seen her in a photo once, or passed her on the street long ago. Her eyes were hollow in a way that didn't look sad, just distant, like she wasn't really in there. I found myself reaching for the door handle. The heat inside the cab was sweltering, thick as syrup. I told myself that was why I was dizzy. Not because of the girl, not because of the house that wasn't supposed to exist. I told myself I'd just get out, drop 3 jugs like I always do, and be done with it. My boots hit the gravel with a crunch that sounded too loud. I kept my eyes locked on the porch. The door still stood open, the darkness inside deeper than it should have been in daylight. I grabbed the first jug, arms straining under the weight. By the time I turned toward the steps, the girl was gone. The window stood empty. The screen door squeaked wider, as if inviting me in. I stopped, every hair on my arms lifted. My stomach turned cold despite the heat. I remembered the dog from the 6th house, the hallway of red light, the face with no features waiting inside house 11. And I remembered Rule 2. I set the jug down, stepped back. That's when the wind hit. Not a desert wind. Not dry. It was wet, damp, like it had blown in off the ocean. Even though we were hundreds of miles from the nearest coast, it carried with it a whisper, not a voice. Exactly, more like a thought not fully formed. But it filled my ears, my chest, my skull. You brought water, didn't you? It wasn't a question. It was a memory. Not mine. I stumbled back toward the truck, my vision blurred. I looked down, and for a second I wasn't standing in sand. I was knee-deep in dark water, cold black water that rippled without wind. Then I blinked, and it was gone. Just dust again, just gravel. But my boots were soaked. I climbed into the cab, slammed the door and jammed the truck into gear. The tires screeched. I didn't look in the mirrors, didn't want to see the porch, or the door, or whatever had replaced the girl. I drove fast, faster than I ever had on the route. At the next stop, I sat in the truck for a full 15 minutes before I calmed down enough to place the next jugs. My hands trembled the entire time. The next morning, the house wasn't there. I drove the stretch between 7 and 8 again, slower this time, looking carefully. Nothing. Just dry, empty land, like it had never existed. Like I'd imagined the whole thing, except I hadn't, because when I checked the back of the truck, one of the jugs was missing. I checked the seal on the tanker. No leaks, no holes. I hadn't dropped it. My log showed 13 stops, but only 12 recorded deliveries. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept dreaming of the girl, of her eyes, of water lapping at the edge of my bed. In the morning, another envelope waited in my locker. Same crooked handwriting, same paper, but this one was short. You delivered. You were warned. That was not one of ours. The note was unsigned, like always, but someone had drawn a symbol in the corner, a circle with 3 sharp lines through it. I didn't recognize it until I flipped to the first page of the water drop protocol. The same symbol was faintly embossed on the header. I think it was always there. I just never noticed. The next week, I followed the list perfectly. No detours, no stops, no exceptions. Still, every so often, I'll see something in the distance. A glimmer, a shape, a flicker of movement behind a window that shouldn't exist, and I know it's testing me. I know it's still waiting. The girl appears in my dreams now. Not every night, just the hot ones, when the air doesn't move and the ceiling fan spins slower than it should. She never speaks, but I always wake up with the taste of salt water in my mouth and the sound of waves crashing in my ears. There is no ocean for miles. Last week, someone slid a photo under my apartment door. No envelope, no note, just an old photograph, faded and sun-warped. It shows me, standing in front of a house I don't remember. The flower pots are full, the shutters are green, and in the window stands the girl with my hand resting gently on her shoulder. Rule 2 obeyed, but not fast enough. Rule 3. Never accept gifts from the residents. No matter how small, gifts are how it starts. That's what the note said, scribbled in the margin of the protocol manual by some long-gone hand. I hadn't noticed it until week 15. The ink was faded, like it had been written decades ago, but the message was clear. Gifts are how it starts, then it gets inside you. I didn't understand what that meant until House 9. House 9 is the strangest of the 13. It sits far back from the road, half swallowed by the earth, like it tried to sink and gave up halfway. The upper floor leans so far forward, it looks like it'll collapse any day, but it never does. The front lawn is made of bone-dry sand, arranged in neat little squares, like someone tried to mimic a Zen garden, but didn't understand what it was for. The resident of House 9 is an old woman, or at least, something that appears as one. She's always standing behind the screen when I arrive, face partly hidden in shadow. She wears the same long navy dress, thin as paper, with sleeves that hang almost to her knees. Her skin is gray, not gray from age, but the color of ash. Her fingers are long and bend at strange angles, like the bones inside were set wrong a long time ago and never fixed. She never speaks, just watches. Sometimes, if I glance quickly enough, I'll see her smile. But during my 15th delivery, something changed. When I stepped onto her porch to drop off the jugs, I found something waiting for me. A small white envelope, propped neatly against the middle jug. No name on the front, just a faint smudge, like it had been touched by wet fingers. I didn't open it. I didn't even pick it up. I turned and walked back to the truck, hands steady, eyes forward. Later, when I finished my route and returned to the depot, I found it sitting in the cab. Same envelope, same faint smudge, no sign of how it got in. That night, I locked it in my glove compartment. The next morning, it was under my pillow. I burned it, poured lighter fluid over the paper, and watched it curl and blacken in my kitchen sink. The flame smelled like burnt cinnamon and copper. The smoke stung my eyes worse than it should have. I waited for it to come back. It didn't, not at first, but the next week, House 9 had something else for me. A ring, delicate, silver, impossibly thin. It sat on the porch railing, like it had been left there casually. The metal glinted in the sunlight, like it wanted to be worn. I didn't touch it. I didn't even look at it too long. But that night, I dreamed about it. Not just the ring, her hand, slipping it onto my finger, her eyes gleaming like wet stones. I felt warmth spread through my chest in the dream, a soft buzzing comfort that made me want to weep and surrender. I woke up wearing it. I tried to yank it off. My skin burned where the metal touched. I shoved my hand under freezing water, tugged with soap and oil. It wouldn't budge. It felt as if the ring had melted into me, fused with the bone. For 3 days, I didn't sleep. I kept imagining her fingers brushing mine. I kept hearing the sound of metal against tile, like the ring was bouncing across the floor just out of reach. I started smelling things, sugar, dust, wilted flowers. Then just as suddenly, it vanished. One moment, it was there, tight around my finger. The next, gone. No mark, no dent, just bare skin and a faint ache, like something had been extracted from the bone itself. That week, a new note appeared in my locker. Unlike the others, it wasn't typed or scrawled. This one was stitched, threaded into a square of rough cloth in dark red string. She marked you, it won't be the last time. Don't take anything else. I kept the cloth, folded it, tucked it under my mattress, but I don't think it mattered. Once she touched me, something changed, because now all of them offer things. House 3 left a bowl of blackberries on the steps, each one glistening, even though there hadn't been rain in weeks. I saw a fly land on one. It didn't fly away. House 5 had a set of wooden carvings lined up on the windowsill. Tiny figures. One looked like me, wearing my uniform, my face etched with eerie precision. When I blinked, the figure had turned to face the house. House 12 offered a coat, hanging on a rack that hadn't been there the week before. My exact size. Inside the pocket was a receipt for a meal I hadn't eaten yet, at a diner I'd never heard of, dated 2 days in the future. But the worst was the man at House 2. He greeted me by name, though I'd never given it. His voice was flat, expression unreadable. He told me I looked tired, that the desert had a way of drying out the mind. He said the water I delivered was cursed, that the homes were only buying time, not life. And then he offered me a glass of something golden. It shimmered, sparkled. It looked like the desert itself had been liquefied. He said it would let me dream again, said it would give me a name that couldn't be erased. I told him I didn't accept gifts. He smiled a little, just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. Then he told me, very softly, that the desert didn't take rejection kindly. I walked back to the truck. That night, I bit down on a piece of glass in my food. No wound, no blood, just the crunch of something not meant to be there. I spat it out, trembling. The shard shimmered gold. I didn't eat the rest. By the end of that month, even the truck started changing. I noticed objects in the cab that didn't belong to me. An old map of roads that didn't exist. A scarf that smelled like roses. Once I found a wristwatch ticking backward, the time glowing faintly in a language I couldn't read. None of it stayed, but none of it left on its own. I burned everything, buried some of it. One night, I drove 40 miles off route to throw a bundle of trinkets into a canyon and watched them tumble into darkness. Still, the offerings continued. Always subtle, always placed with care. They want me to accept. They want me to acknowledge them. That's how they get inside, not through possession, through permission. Every week I feel the pressure growing, like a hand pressing gently on the back of my neck, guiding me towards something soft and final. Like if I just accept one small kindness, everything will make sense again. Sometimes, in the silence between stops, I almost give in. But then I remember the ring. I remember waking up with it on my hand and feeling like I'd lost something I didn't know I had. I remember the stitched warning, and I remember the way the man at House 2 looked at me, not like a stranger, but like a butcher eyeing meat he already owns. So I follow Rule 3. I take nothing, accept nothing. I keep my hands to myself and my deliveries on schedule, because I don't know what they're offering. But I know the moment I accept a single thing, I'm no longer just the waterman, I'm theirs. The next delivery run started like the others. Dust kicked up behind my tires, wind humming across the windshield, sky stretching wide and white above the desert. But something felt different this time. It was subtle at first, just a low throb in my chest, like my body was trying to warn me before my brain could catch up. I told myself it was the heat, or maybe lack of sleep. But then, I passed the second house. The curtains were drawn. Nothing new there, except this time, I could swear the shadows behind them were moving in time with the truck's approach. Not quickly, not urgently, just following. At the third house, the back gate was open. At the fourth, The porch light flickered once when I stepped out, even though it was barely past noon. None of those things made me panic. I'd gotten used to strange by now. I'd gotten used to rules. But around House 6, I spotted something in the distance, way out near the horizon. A figure. It stood still, almost too still, like it wasn't shaped right to sway in the wind. I slowed down, thinking maybe it was a marker or a piece of equipment. Then it raised its hand. A slow, steady wave. I didn't wave back. I sped up. The route twisted after that, deeper into the canyon stretch, where signal dropped and the sky felt like it was pressing down. I turned off the radio. I didn't want anything else in my head. It wasn't until House 9 that I found something impossible. Parked beside the narrow path was a second water truck. Not similar, identical. Same dents on the passenger door, same cracked mirror, even the bumper sticker, faded, unreadable, peeling at the corner. I killed the engine and climbed out, walking slow. The door was open, no one inside, but there was a clipboard on the seat. It looked just like mine, but the handwriting wasn't familiar. And the delivery log showed this exact route, same addresses, same stops, only the dates went back farther than mine. Years maybe. The ink had faded to a ghost gray scrawl. I picked it up and flipped to the last page. A single sentence had been written across the bottom, in rushed, shaky script. Don't let them ride with you, not even once. I didn't want to read it again. I tossed the clipboard into the cab and stepped away. When I looked down at my boots, the dust was moving, not blowing, sliding, like it was trying to pour itself uphill, against gravity, toward the truck's tires. I jumped back into my own vehicle and didn't stop until I reached House 10. I didn't tell anyone at the depot about the second truck. I didn't know how to explain it. Didn't know if anyone would believe me, or if it would just mark me as the next one to disappear. But I kept thinking about that sentence. Don't let them ride with you. I remembered one of the old lines in the orientation binder, one I'd barely noticed at the time. Something about not engaging with people on foot in the delivery zone. I'd assumed it was legal boilerplate, but now it echoed in my head, with something heavier behind it. That's when I realized what Rule 4 had always been. You must never pick up anyone on the route, no matter how desperate they seem, no matter how human they look. Do not offer them a ride. It sounds cold until you see one. And I did. 3 miles past House 10, she looked 17, maybe 18. Torn jeans, dirty white hoodie, her shoes were gone, feet cut and blistered from walking. She was standing on the edge of the road, arms wrapped around herself, hair stuck to her face from sweat and dust. When she saw the truck, her eyes lit up. She stepped into the lane, waving. Not frantic, just hopeful. I slowed down. It was instinct. Everything about her screamed, "Help me." She didn't run toward the truck. She waited, hands shaking, a gash down the side of her leg that looked deep enough to need stitches. I rolled the window halfway down. I didn't know what I was doing. Maybe part of me still thought it could be real, that she could be someone who wandered off the highway, someone lost, someone normal. She said she'd been walking for 2 days. Her voice was hoarse, her lips cracked. She said the others had left her behind, that she didn't know where she was, that she just needed to get to the next town, any town. I kept my hands on the wheel. I asked her where she'd come from. She didn't answer right away, just stared at me with those dry, sunburned eyes. Then she said something that didn't make sense. "I remember this truck," she whispered. "You were here last week." I didn't reply. I waved then too. Her voice wavered now. "You didn't stop, but I forgive you. You can fix it now." I put the truck in gear. Her hand hit the door frame. Not hard, just enough to make me freeze. "Please, I'm so thirsty. I'll sit in the back. I won't make a sound. Just a few miles." She leaned closer, and that's when I saw her teeth. All of them. row after row, like a shark's packed behind each other, edge to edge. She smiled wide, too wide, her mouth stretched nearly to her ears. That's when I floored the gas and didn't look back. The mirror cracked on its own. About a mile later, I didn't stop. I made the rest of the deliveries without speaking. My hands didn't stop shaking until the next morning. Now I know why the rule exists. You can't let them in, not once, not ever. They don't just want water, they want space. Room inside your cab, room inside your head, and once they ride with you, they never leave. Not fully. You'll hear them breathing behind you, even when you're alone. You'll feel the seat shift. You'll wake up in your own bed and wonder if they followed you home. That's what happened to the others. That's why there are trucks that sit abandoned in the sand. That's why there's a clipboard with someone else's name and someone else's final words. It only takes one mistake, and the worst part, they learn. Every time you pass them by, they remember. They practice the face, the voice, the story. Next time, they'll look even more like someone you'd stop for. Someone you used to know. Someone who knows your name. It wasn't until the following Thursday that I realized something had changed inside the truck. I'd cleaned it twice since that last delivery. Wiped down the dash, scrubbed the driver's seat, sprayed the interior with disinfectant. I even vacuumed the floors, trying to shake the feeling that something had come in with me, that even if I hadn't let her ride, she'd left something behind. A smear of her presence, tucked in the seams of the cab. But no matter how much I cleaned, it didn't help. There was a smell now, not rot, not mildew, just wrong, like air that had been filtered through a body that shouldn't be alive. I told myself it was my imagination, that the heat was making me paranoid. But then I noticed the mirror again. The crack had widened, and there was something else. At certain angles, when the sun caught it just right, it almost looked like the glass wasn't reflecting me at all. Just the seat, empty. Still, I kept going. The depot didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. The route seemed longer that week, not in miles, in weight. Every house felt heavier, the desert more silent. I just dropped a load at house 14 when I noticed the first piece. It was a paper. Folded, old, stained around the edges, tucked into the mailbox, like someone had mailed it from nowhere. I pulled it out and opened it. On the inside, scrawled in huge looping letters, were 4 words. Don't drink the water. That was all. No signature, no address. Just that sentence, repeated over and over, spiraling around the page until it bled off the edges. I tossed it into the glove box and told myself it was a prank. But then I started noticing the containers. At first I thought I was imagining it. The tanks at some homes were never as full as they should have been. I'd been delivering the standard amounts, but something didn't add up. At house 17, I spotted what looked like residue near the spout. Thick yellow-gray streaks that didn't match the water I'd pumped in. The ground around the outlet was crusted. The plants nearby had wilted into a strange waxy shape, like they'd tried to curl away from the runoff. I stared at my own water tank for a long time. I'd never questioned what was in it. I was told it came from an underground reservoir somewhere off-grid. The guy who trained me said the depot filtered it, said it was all clean. But now I wasn't so sure. That night I made a choice. I drained a sample into a bottle and brought it home. Let it sit on my kitchen counter, waited until I couldn't stand it anymore. Then I poured a little into a clear glass, held it to the light. It looked fine, clear, still, no visible particles. But the moment I brought it close to my nose, I knew. Water isn't supposed to smell like copper and burnt plastic. I took it out to the yard and dumped it into the soil. The next day, the patch of grass where it landed was black. Not brown, not dead, black. Like something had burned it from within. That's when it clicked. Rule 5 had been right in front of me all along. No matter how hot it gets, no matter how thirsty you are, Never drink from the delivery tanks. It seemed obvious now, but back then, I thought maybe the tanks had just been contaminated somehow. Maybe the depot had slipped. Maybe it wasn't always like this. Then I saw the video. I wasn't supposed to. It was on a dusty flash drive, buried in the glove compartment of the backup truck. The one I sometimes used when mine was in for maintenance. The label on the drive had worn off, just a faded white rectangle. I don't know what compelled me to plug it in. Maybe I was looking for answers. Maybe I just wanted to confirm that I wasn't the only one who'd started asking questions. The footage was grainy, time-stamped 4 years earlier. It showed a man sitting on the back of a water truck. He looked exhausted, skin raw from sun exposure, uniform streaked with sweat and sand. He was holding a canteen. He stared at it for a long time, then looked straight into the camera and said, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, "It changes you." Then he unscrewed the cap, took a long drink and smiled. Not a tired smile, not a grateful one. A wrong smile. His teeth didn't match the expression. His eyes didn't blink. And the longer he held that grin, the more his face started to look like it wasn't his anymore. The footage cut out after that, but I saw enough. Whatever's in those tanks, it isn't just water, and it doesn't just hurt you. It alters you. The people out there, in those homes, maybe they're not residents anymore. Maybe they're just hosts, vessels, test sites. Maybe that's why the rules exist, not to protect them from us, but to protect us from them. And maybe that's why the heat never seems to bother them. Why they don't flinch when I pull up at noon and the ground is shimmering like a stovetop. They're not thirsty. They haven't been for a long time, but they want you to be. They want you to take a sip, just once, because once you do, it's not just your body that changes, it's your mind. Your thoughts won't be yours anymore. You'll start to hear whispers in your sleep. You'll wake up craving dust. You'll feel a pull toward the empty parts of the desert. And eventually, you'll stop coming back to town altogether. You'll stay out there, in the heat, in the silence, in the places no maps show anymore, just like the others. It was around that same time I noticed the trucks weren't being refilled at the depot anymore. I'd show up at dawn like always, drive onto the platform, hook up the hoses, and wait. The gauge would tick up. Everything looked normal. But one morning, I got curious. Popped the hatch on the tank before the fill started, just to see how much was left. It was full, almost to the brim. I shut it fast, heart thudding. Maybe they were just recycling. Maybe the system had glitched. I told myself that as I climbed into the cab, drove the first 20 miles in silence, tried not to think about the smell in the vents or the reflection in the cracked mirror. But it kept happening. 3 days in a row, no actual refill, just the performance of one. And still, the deliveries went on. The houses were waiting. By now, I'd memorized their rhythms. I knew which ones left notes, which ones stayed eerily still, but something had shifted again. Now they were watching, not just peeking through curtains, not just lurking behind dirty glass. They were watching me, unblinking, still, like animals trying to decide if you're food or kin. One house in particular started to bother me more than the rest. Number 22. It had always been odd, even among the others. There were no footprints in the dust, no tire tracks, nothing to suggest anyone ever came or went. The place was too clean, like it had been staged, like a model home placed in a graveyard of abandoned properties. And there were mirrors, so many mirrors, on the porch, in the windows, hanging from the trees that shouldn't have been alive. Little circles of glass tied to branches, spinning slowly even when the wind was dead. I started skipping it. First time, nothing happened. The next day, the address wasn't on the manifest. I thought maybe the system adjusted. Then the third morning, it was there again. Same time, same quantity, same coordinates. And this time, something else was waiting for me in the truck bed. A note written on the back of an old delivery form. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, like someone had scrawled it with fingers that didn't quite remember how to hold a pen. It read, "Don't skip 22 again. Not unless you're ready." I stared at it for a long time. Then I got out, walked around to the rear tank, and flipped the nozzle just enough to let a thin stream of water bleed into the dirt. I watched it soak into the dust, hiss silently as it disappeared beneath the surface. Not a sound, not even a splash. When I looked up, I saw movement in the mirror on the porch. Not mine. I blinked. It was gone. Still, I didn't stop. I made the rest of the deliveries. Drove home, tried to sleep. I couldn't. Something was wrong with the house. Not just eerie, angry. Like I'd broken an agreement I hadn't known I made. Like I'd turned down an invitation, and now the host was insulted. That night, the mirror in my hallway cracked down the center, a fine, perfect line that bisected my reflection straight through the eyes. I stayed awake until sunrise. The next morning, I drove back out. Same route, same heat, same strange stillness. And when I reached 22, I stopped. No sound, no sign of life. But the mirrors, they were all turned inward now. Facing the door, I stepped out of the cab. My feet felt heavy. The porch creaked when I mounted it, the air thick and wrong. I didn't knock, just stood there and waited. That's when I noticed something written on the threshold, carved shallow into the wood, words that shimmered when the light hit them. Only those who face themselves may pass. I took a shaky breath and looked into the nearest mirror. Not my face. My body, sure, same clothes, same frame, but the eyes were too dark, too still, and the mouth was twitching in a way mine wasn't. Then it raised a hand. I hadn't moved. I backed away, heart pounding, turned, and fled to the truck. The next day, I asked one of the older drivers if he ever made deliveries to number 22. His face went pale. He told me he used to, until the day he walked up to the porch and saw himself already standing there, just waiting, smiling. He said he turned and left, never went back. That's when he told me the next rule, one that wasn't on any manifest or training sheet, but every long-term driver knew it. You never enter a home that has more mirrors than windows. Not because they're cursed, not because they show something else, because they trap you. They pull out the part of you that wants to stay in the desert, the part that thinks maybe the silence isn't so bad, maybe the isolation feels like home, maybe the thirst isn't painful anymore, and once that part is out, it doesn't want to go back in. That's Rule 6, spoken only in hushed warnings at midnight depots, passed from sunburned lips to trembling hands. If a house is watching you through more mirrors than eyes, walk away. Never try to see yourself inside. I drove the rest of the week with the mirrors covered in duct tape. Rear view, side view, even the tiny one mounted above the dashboard. I blacked them all out. It wasn't paranoia. It was self-defense. I knew what I'd seen in the glass, and I didn't want to see it again. The problem was, when you cover your mirrors, you stop seeing more than just reflections. You stop noticing what follows you. I first felt it near the canyon switchback, mile marker 46. The air got heavy, not hot, but dense, like something thick was pressing down on the truck, squeezing the metal from above. The tires groaned on the gravel. The engine strained even though the incline wasn't steep. I checked the load. Same as always, 12 tanks, each supposed to be 3/4 full, but it felt like I was hauling something else. Something that didn't slosh. At first, I told myself it was the suspension, or the road, or the heat warping my senses. But when I stopped at the 9th house and stepped out to unhook the line, I heard the hiss of the pressure release valve before I'd even touched it. The tank was already primed, the gauge read empty. I stood there, sweating under the sun, staring at a truck that had delivered water before I'd even opened the hose. Someone or something was making the deliveries with me. I turned back toward the cab, but paused. The driver's door was ajar, only by an inch. Just a hair, but I never leave it open. My instincts screamed at me to check the back. I climbed the steps cautiously, hand on the rusted railing, and swung the tank's rear door open. Nothing. Just the silver cylinder walls and the faint smell of something vaguely metallic. I climbed inside, just enough to see the corners. Empty. As I backed out, I caught something in the corner of my eye. A handprint, small, greasy, pressed flat against the inner wall. It was facing the wrong way. The fingertips pointed inward, as if someone inside the tank had pressed against the metal, trying to stay inside or keep something else out. I drove faster the next day, didn't stop to eat, didn't take breaks between houses, even skipped writing the log entries until I was back at the depot. But that pressure, it never left. It was like being watched from the back seat of your own car. That slow, icy dread crawling up your spine. I caught myself glancing at the duct-taped mirrors, even though I couldn't see anything through them. By the end of the week, I couldn't sleep. The sound started on Saturday night, soft tapping from inside the water tank. I lived in a second-floor walk-up, miles from the depot. No reason I should hear it from home, but I did. 3 slow taps, then silence. 3 more. I checked the windows. Nothing. I turned off the AC, waited. Nothing. Then, as I sat in the dark, it came again, closer this time, like the tank had followed me, like it wanted me to know it wasn't empty anymore. When I went in Monday morning, a different truck was waiting. Same route, same manifest, but the tank was welded shut. No latch, no hatch, no access panel. Just a smooth silver drum, sealed from end to end. I asked the depot manager why. He said something had crawled out of the last one. His voice was flat, like it wasn't the first time he'd said it. Tank was clean, no damage. But the last driver said he started seeing footprints inside. Bare ones, like a child's. We don't ask too many questions when that starts. I nodded, even though I didn't understand. Then he gave me the next piece. You know the rule, right? He said casually. If you ever feel the truck getting heavier after you've already made a delivery. I shook my head slowly. He leaned in. Don't stop. Don't open the back. Don't look inside. Just keep driving and pray it gets bored before you reach the next house. That's when it clicked. Rule 7 wasn't about the water or the road. It wasn't even about the deliveries. It was about the weight, the kind you can't measure, the kind that watches you through steel walls and duct-taped mirrors, waiting for the moment you let your guard down. So now when I feel the truck lurch, or strain, or breathe in a way machines shouldn't, I just press the gas harder. I keep my eyes forward, and I don't think about what might be catching a ride between drop-offs. Because that's Rule 7. If the truck gets heavier between stops, don't investigate. Don't question it. Don't even think about it too loud. Just drive. The drive to Sector 12 was bone dry. The kind of route where you could lose track of time, staring into the tan nothingness outside the windshield. The sky hung too low, as if the horizon had sunken a little more overnight, and the desert wasn't just wide anymore, it was sinking. I'd gotten used to the loneliness of the routes, but something about this stretch made me uncomfortable. The engine felt quieter here, like the sand muffled even the inner workings of the truck. I tried to keep the windows closed, tried not to look too long at the mirages bending heat in the distance, and I especially tried not to glance at the single shape that had been trailing me for the last 3 miles. It wasn't a car, it wasn't on wheels, and no matter how fast I drove, it never got closer. But it never fell behind either. The house at the edge of the canyon looked different than I remembered it. Most of the homes on the route were dilapidated, sun-faded paint, boarded-up windows, metal siding that had been left to blister in the heat. But this one had changed. The last time I delivered here, the place had been abandoned. Front door hanging from its hinges. No sign of life, no light, just a dark shape, slumped in a chair on the porch, that didn't react when I spoke. Now the windows were intact, curtains drawn, The door was fixed, sand swept neatly from the front steps, and the dark shape was gone. As I stepped out of the truck, the smell hit me. It wasn't rot or rust. It was too clean, like antiseptic left too long in the sun. I held my breath and began unwinding the hose. The tanks were silent, no hiss of pressure, no rattle of shifting liquid inside. I kept glancing back at the road where I'd last seen the shape, but it was gone. Or worse, it wasn't. My eyes just couldn't find it anymore. The house didn't have a standard port like the others. Just a crude pipe sticking out of the ground a few feet from the porch. It looked like it had been soldered by hand, as if someone had jury-rigged their own connection to the supply. I didn't want to get closer. Everything in me screamed to get back in the truck and drive. But procedure was procedure. We delivered, we logged, we moved on. That was the routine. That was the deal. I latched the hose and hit the release. The tank shuddered, only once. But it was enough. The motion didn't come from inside the truck. It came from beneath the soil. A deep vibration, not mechanical, not grounded in anything I could explain. My boots sank slightly in the sand. The air felt heavier than it should have. I squinted up at the porch, and for a moment, I thought I saw the curtain shift, just an inch. Just enough to reveal a sliver of what looked like a hand pressed against the glass. I didn't wait for the pressure to balance. I shut off the valve early and reeled the hose back in, without securing the cap. As I turned to climb back into the cab, I noticed the door was already open. The keys were still in the ignition. The engine was idling. I hadn't left it that way. My stomach turned cold. The cabin reeked of that same chemical smell now, faint but unmistakable. The seat was wet, not soaked, just damp, like someone had been sitting there, sweating, breathing, watching. I didn't even hesitate. I drove without buckling, eyes locked on the next mile marker, hands clenched so tight on the wheel, my knuckles ached. 2 stops later, I found something tucked between the pages of the route log. It was a note, handwritten, folded with precise creases. No signature, no instructions, just a sentence that was underlined 3 times in thick pencil. Do not speak to anyone who isn't on the manifest. I stared at it for minutes, trying to piece together what it meant. Then I realized I hadn't checked the manifest today. I always did before the first delivery, but this time I'd skipped it. Rushed, distracted. Something had thrown off my rhythm, and now I was driving blind. I pulled over, slid the clipboard out from behind the passenger seat, and flipped through the delivery sheet. My eyes darted to the names and addresses, and froze. The house near the canyon wasn't listed. There was no record of that stop, no note in the log, nothing on the tank's tracker. I hadn't made a delivery there. Not officially. According to the system, it didn't exist. My mouth went dry. I tried to remember if I'd touched anything, spoke to anyone, and that's when it hit me. I hadn't said a word during the delivery. Not to myself, not to the house, not even to the hose. Something had stopped me. Some instinct had clamped my jaw shut before I'd greeted the structure, before I'd muttered my usual frustrations aloud. And now I knew why. That note was more than advice. It was a warning. Rule 8 is this: if someone appears at a house that isn't on your manifest, do not talk to them. Not even casually, not even accidentally. Silence is the only thing that keeps them from getting inside. It explained the locked jaw, the lurching silence, the way the door had opened by itself. That wasn't wind or habit. That was them trying to get close, trying to see if I'd open my mouth, invite them in with a word. I don't know what happens if you speak to one, but I think it's permanent. I think it's irreversible. I think it's why the last driver never came back. Since then, I double-checked the manifest before every stop. Even if I've done the route 100 times, I compare the house numbers, the names, the angles of the driveways, because sometimes they change, slightly, subtly, enough to look like a normal stop, until you're standing at the wrong door with your hand on the latch and your throat halfway through a casual hello. I think they listen through the pipes. I think they wait beneath the foundation, or maybe between the drywall, curled up where the water should be. The ones not on the list, the ones that don't exist until you acknowledge them. They feed on recognition, on attention, on language, and when they hear your voice, when they realize you've seen them, something fundamental changes. That's why I keep the windows rolled up now. Even when the heat's unbearable, even when sweat pools in my collar and I start to feel lightheaded, I don't risk the sound of my voice slipping out into the open desert. I don't hum, I don't curse, I don't even whisper when I'm alone in the cab, because I know they're out there, still following, still listening, still waiting for me to forget. The manifest felt heavier the next morning. I know that sounds ridiculous. Paper doesn't gain weight, but that clipboard sat on the dash like it held something more than rote numbers and names. It pressed against the silence in the cab like a physical presence, daring me to flip through it and see if something had changed. I resisted for the first 5 minutes of the drive, trying to focus on the horizon, the sand, the dull rumble of the tires chewing up desert road, but the weight never lessened. The feeling only grew stronger, the sense that something was waiting to be discovered among the pages. I gave in just before the first stop. Same neighborhoods, same names, until the last page. There was a new entry, row 27, Dominguez Plot, Unit A. No customer name, no special notes, coordinates only. It was written in a different pen, darker, bolder, not typed like the others. And the signature at the bottom had been smudged, like someone had intentionally rubbed their thumb across it. The address wasn't familiar, but the coordinates were in Sector 9, somewhere near the outer perimeter where the map began to dissolve into old survey lines and dry gulches. The kind of place that hadn't seen fresh plumbing in decades. I should have called dispatch. I should have asked about the addition, but there was something in the back of my mind that warned me not to ask. Like if I said it out loud, it would become permanent. Acknowledging it would anchor it to my reality. So I drove. The road to the plot was hardly a road at all, just 2 deep tire tracks slicing through the crusted sand, weaving between boulders and fallen telephone poles that had long since gone silent. The path narrowed as I continued, until the branches of dry, skeletal trees began scraping against the sides of the truck. I kept going. The GPS blinked in and out, struggling to stay oriented, and by the time I reached the destination, the only thing visible around me was dust and bone-white hills. The house was a structure in the loosest sense of the word, part bunker, part burial vault. Half of it was submerged in the earth, the rest covered by a crumbling shell of brick and corrugated metal. A faded sign had been nailed to the entrance. Unit A, no windows, no movement, no sign of water usage at all. It felt more like a sealed tomb than a home. But I was already there. I parked 30 yards away and ran the hose across the hardpan. The connection was embedded directly into the dirt. No house plumbing, just a pipe sticking up from the ground, rusted and crusted with pale deposits like something had been leaching through it. The ground around it was cracked open, a ring of scorched earth and collapsed stone like an impact crater. I crouched beside it, attached the nozzle, and turned the release valve. Nothing happened. I checked the tank pressure. Still full, hoses intact. No blockage. I tried again. Still nothing. Then I heard it. Not from the tank. Not from the hose. From beneath the ground, a low dragging exhale. Like something breathing through wet cloth. It didn't rise in volume. Didn't try to mimic wind or gas. It was deliberate. Slow, alive. I stumbled back from the pipe, pulling the hose with me. That's when I saw the door of the bunker open. Only a few inches, just enough for the darkness inside to spill out like oil across the dirt. I didn't approach. I didn't speak. I didn't even breathe loud enough to hear. Then something stepped out. It wasn't human, but it wore the shape of one, a stretched, narrow thing with skin too thin, like wax pulled over bone. No eyes, no mouth, but it turned its head toward me all the same, and in its hand, it held something black and fluttering, a folded page, the manifest. My manifest. It stepped closer, dragging the edge of its foot through the dust, never lifting its limbs, just sliding forward like a puppet on the wrong strings. It held the paper out. That was when I remembered the rule, not the one written down, not the ones given by dispatch. This was older, instinctual, something that crawled up from my spine and whispered into my memory, like it had always been there. If the rote log ever shows you a stop that doesn't make sense, one you don't remember approving, one that exists in a space that feels older than the map, it's not a delivery, it's an invitation, and you are not supposed to accept. That's Rule 9. I turned away from the figure. Slowly, deliberately, never running, never acknowledging it. I began reeling the hose back in, inch by inch, my hands shaking so badly the nozzle clattered against the reel. I didn't look up until I was inside the cab, the doors locked, the windows sealed. The thing was gone. The paper was still there, fluttering in the dirt, just outside where the hose had been. I refused to retrieve it. I left the reel partially unwound. I drove, and I didn't stop until the main road reappeared in my mirrors. I didn't log the visit. I didn't file the paperwork. And the next morning, the entry was gone from the manifest. No Dominguez plot, no Unit A, but my reel was still short 20 feet of hose. I think that's how they test you. I think the route throws these in sometimes, inserted between stops like splinters in skin, to see if you'll go off script, to see if you'll follow curiosity instead of procedure, and if you do, they mark you. Maybe not physically, maybe not immediately, but you become one of the ones who see them. And once you see them, you can't go back to pretending the route is just logistics. There are places out here where the desert has given up pretending to be empty, places where the infrastructure decays into ritual, where delivery becomes offering, where the pipes run deeper than they should, and water doesn't quench thirst, it binds something. I don't know what's beneath that vault. I don't want to know, but I know now that the manifest isn't always ours, that sometimes it gets rewritten by things that live beneath the rules we follow. And the only protection we have is to pretend we don't see the edits. So I've made a new habit. Every morning before I leave, I take a fresh red pen and mark every stop myself. A line through the ones I recognize. A circle around the ones I don't. If there's a stop that wasn't there the day before, I ignore it. Even if dispatch follows up. Even if they say it's a system error and the records show the entry was always there, because it wasn't. I keep the circled stops locked in a separate folder now, far from the truck, far from the road, and I never speak their names out loud, not even to myself. I didn't sleep after the Dominguez plot delivery. I tried. I lay on the cot in the depot break room, with my cap over my face, the fan spinning uselessly above me, pushing stale air in slow circles. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure holding the page. And not just standing there, the memory kept shifting, replaying itself differently each time, like my brain was testing alternate versions of the moment I'd turned away. Sometimes it reached further, sometimes it was closer than I remembered. Once it smiled, so when dawn came, I didn't wait for my dispatch window. I went straight to the tank, prepped the truck, and pulled the clipboard from the dashboard before anyone else could touch it. The pages were clean. No handwritten additions, no strange entries, every stop accounted for, except one. Row 11 had been left blank. That never happened. Even test routes or reruns came labeled. But this line was nothing but an empty grid space. No name, no address, no notes, just a route number and a time block. I traced the number 3 times with my thumb, half expecting it to smudge like the last one. It didn't. The ink held, which meant it had come from inside the system. But I knew better by now. I almost skipped it, almost crossed it out like I had promised myself I would do. But the moment I reached for my pen, the silence in the truck changed, like the air pressure had dropped a few degrees, like the engine was holding its breath. I didn't touch the manifest. I drove. The first 9 stops ran smooth, routine in the mechanical sense, not in comfort. I was scanning every window, every valve, every doorway, like something might be watching from inside. But the houses were all empty in that way. We expect abandoned homes to be lifeless, dusty, just still, no echoes. Stop 10, however, was different. It didn't appear on the GPS, didn't even follow the natural logic of the route. It was located between 2 zones that shouldn't intersect, a soft void, spatially. I had to pull off the main road and drive 5 miles across unmarked sand trails to reach the coordinates. There was no house waiting, just a structure made of wood and barbed wire, a circular corral, partially buried by dunes, the fencing scorched in places like it had been set on fire and never repaired. In the center was an old cistern, stone, ringed with sandbags, lid rusted half shut. It looked like something used during the war. No plumbing, no pipes, and yet my tank's auto valve clicked open when I reversed toward it. That shouldn't have been possible. There was no receptor to engage the system, but the gauge read active, and the hose began to unspool on its own. I climbed out of the cab and approached slowly, crunching across brittle earth and thorn bushes. I didn't want to look into the cistern. Every part of me warned against it, but curiosity doesn't listen to instinct. It finds cracks in it and leaks through. I peered inside. No water, just a cavity of pale stone and shadow, descending far deeper than it should have. And at the very bottom, something shimmered, not liquid, not movement, a kind of heatless glow, like a reflection with no source. I stepped back. That's when I noticed the birds. Hundreds of them, perched along the wire fencing, silent, watching. They hadn't made a sound when I arrived. No flapping, no cawing, just eyes, black, tiny, unblinking. Every direction I turned, they adjusted in unison. Not one flew, not one moved independently. It was as if the same thought passed through them all at once. I knew then that I had made a mistake coming here, that the blank manifest slot hadn't been a system error. It had been a test. If the route gives you a destination with no name and no history, it's not for you to complete. It's for you to survive. That's Rule 10. I reached for the hose, intending to shut off the valve and reel it back in, but the hose wasn't there. It had unspooled fully, every inch dragged across the dirt into the cistern like it had been swallowed. I could still hear the hiss of pressure, but the tank's volume hadn't dropped. No water was missing. Then I saw the birds move, all at once, not flying, falling. They dropped from the wire like stones, some striking the ground, others tumbling into the cistern mouth, silent as leaves. Their wings didn't flutter, their bodies didn't resist. They dropped with intent, as if answering a call only they could hear. Within seconds, the corral was empty. I should have run, but something in me, something old and scared and obedient, made me wait, stand still, not interfere. And then the hose began to retract. Not by my hand. It coiled back up across the ground, slowly at first, then faster, whistling through the cracked sand like a living thing. It curled around my boots before I could step back, slithering like it had weight, like it had learned how to move. I scrambled away, heart hammering against my ribs, until the nozzle clanked back into its housing with a hiss. The tank gauge never changed. The manifest didn't update, but when I opened the cab door, there was a bird perched on the driver's seat, dead, its feathers soaked, as if pulled from the ocean. I didn't touch it. I sat down beside it, engine idling, staring at the corral until the wind picked up and covered the fencing in a fresh layer of sand. By the time I turned the truck around, it looked like the place had never existed. Back at the depot, I logged only 9 stops. No one asked, but the next morning, there was a red sticker on my windshield. A small one, shaped like a teardrop. I don't know what it means, but I haven't tried to remove it. The deliveries are becoming something else, less like logistics, more like rituals I was never supposed to witness. The tank feels heavier, even when it's empty. The hose sometimes creaks at night when the truck is off, like it's dreaming, and the birds are back. They follow me now, not all the time, not in great numbers, but every so often, I'll see one land on a power line or a road sign as I pass, watching, waiting. They know I went to the corral, they know I looked, and I think they're waiting to see if I'll go again. I won't. I've circled that row on every new manifest since. I won't be lured back, but the hose has started to extend on its own again. Just a few inches, just enough to remind me that it remembers. The depot is changing. It's subtle. But I notice, maybe because I've been here too long, maybe because I've started to pay attention to the way light moves when it shouldn't, or how certain doors never close completely anymore. The break room fan now turns in the opposite direction. The hum of the lights at night pulses with a rhythm I can almost sync my heartbeat to if I sit still long enough. No one else seems to acknowledge it. Maybe they can't. Maybe I'm not supposed to. The red sticker is still on my windshield. It's dry now, brittle at the edges, but I haven't touched it. I tried once, just brushed it with the back of my hand. And for the rest of that day, every house on my route had its blinds open. Every single one, not people behind them, just the blinds, pulled wide, like the houses were staring out as I passed. I kept my eyes on the road. The sticker stays. Dispatch gave me a new clipboard yesterday. Same truck, same tank, same route designation, but the page felt off. It was too crisp, not fresh paper crisp, manufactured crisp, like it had been made to look new but wasn't. The lines were slightly misaligned. The font used on the address fields was subtly wrong, not obvious, just wrong, like a word spelled correctly in a dream. Still, I drove. The first 2 stops were standard, same empty structures, same dry ground, but on the 3rd stop, I noticed something strange. The house had been moved, not changed, moved. It sat a full 30 feet northeast of where it had always been. Same foundation markings, same broken porch swing, same cracked satellite dish still pointed directly at the sky, but not in the same place. The driveway now ended in sand. The old footprint was still visible, like a scar where it used to be. I backed the truck in anyway. The hose unspooled like normal. The valve clicked into place, but as I stepped down to monitor the transfer, I heard a soft impact behind me. Not loud, not threatening, just, wait. I turned slowly. A chair now sat on the porch. I swear to whatever God has jurisdiction over this land, it wasn't there a second ago. One of those folding lawn chairs, the kind with faded fabric that cuts into your thighs when you sit too long. Desert dust coated the arms. A beer can rested on the left side, empty, crushed just slightly, as if held too tightly. But the chair, it was facing me. I checked the manifest. Nothing noted. No human contact expected. No supervisory test flag. I approached it anyway. There was no sound from the house. No sign of entry. But the screen door creaked slightly, as if breathing. The chair remained still, but the can was gone. Just gone. Not rolled. Not fallen. Vanished. I backed away. Slowly. Let the hose finish. Didn't log the anomaly. I left it behind. But in the side mirror as I turned back onto the main road, I swear I saw the chair facing the opposite direction. Watching the road now. The next 2 stops were ghost quiet. Nothing overtly wrong. Just the sense of being observed. A second after you stop looking. I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than usual, noticing patterns in the sand that weren't made by tires. Half footprints, only the back half, like someone walking backward or sinking mid-step. Then came the 6th stop. It was supposed to be one of the abandoned diners on the outskirts. The kind with shattered windows, menus still taped to the inside glass, and booths that haven't been cleaned since before I started this job. I'd been there before. I remembered the layout. The red awning, the bent sign that said fresh eggs, but the F had fallen off. This time, there was music playing inside. Soft, instrumental, a piano. Notes spaced like they were unsure of the melody, just searching, feeling the air. I parked across the road and didn't move for 10 minutes. Eventually, I decided to approach. Inside, the booths were occupied. Not by people, not exactly. Silhouettes made of dust, held in place like smoke frozen mid-breath. Each one facing forward, as if waiting for something. Their heads tilted slightly toward the window. None moved. The piano continued. It was coming from the kitchen. I should have left. I know that now. But I stepped inside, crossed the dusty tile, moved between the tables without touching anything. When I reached the swinging doors to the kitchen, the music stopped. I didn't push through. I couldn't. My arm locked, because a whisper came from behind me. Not a voice. Just a whisper, a breath with shape. It didn't say words, but I understood. If the building plays music that isn't meant for you, do not go inside. Wait until the last note, then walk away. That's Rule 11. I didn't turn around. I stepped backward until I was out the door, out of the shadow, back into the sun, and when I looked again, the booths were empty. The dust was gone. Not scattered, gone. The menu signs were gone too. The windows no longer broken, but fogged, covered in condensation from the inside. I didn't stay long enough to check if the kitchen was still playing anything. I drove fast. The truck felt heavier than it should have. Not the usual drag from a full tank. Something colder, denser, like it had picked something up. I stopped only once to check. The undercarriage was dry, the hose properly stowed, but the back bumper was wet. No source, no smell, just wet, as if something had been clinging there during the drive, and slid off without leaving a trace. I didn't radio dispatch. I didn't file the diner report. But I started circling music-related flags in red marker on the next few manifests, just in case. So far none have repeated. But sometimes, when I park in the depot, the engine ticks in rhythm, like it remembers the piano. And at night, just as I fall asleep on that cursed cot, I hear the same faint melody from somewhere beyond the depot's chain-link fence. Distant, dreamlike, following me. It was a Tuesday, or at least the clock in the depot said so. I'd stopped checking my phone days ago. The signal had gone from weak to unstable to something else entirely. Calls didn't go through. Messages arrived out of sequence. Once I opened a voicemail that was just the sound of my own voice breathing, except I hadn't recorded it. I recognized the inhale, the slow exhale, the slight tremor I get when I'm trying not to panic. It was me, but I wasn't the one holding the phone. After that, I started leaving it face down in my locker. Still, I remembered it was a Tuesday, because the depot smelled like oranges. That's how I know. The scent is synthetic, piped through the vents for morale, they say, but it only happens on Tuesdays. I've started to measure time by these false fragrances. Lavender means Thursday, vanilla is Monday, clove and tar is Sunday, and if it smells like bleach, it's not a real day, and I should stay in my truck. So when the citrus came, I loaded up. The manifest was thinner than usual. 4 stops, all older homes, the kind with sharp angles and boarded windows, the ones that hadn't had occupants in years. Their notes were minimal. Delivery required. Do not approach structure. That phrase has lost all meaning. Everything here requires distance. The first 2 stops were uneventful. I kept my head low, eyes forward, let the hose do its job. At the second house, something scratched at the inside of the walls while the tank emptied, but I didn't flinch. That's become routine. Sometimes the buildings breathe, sometimes they speak. I've learned not to listen too closely. It was the 3rd stop that changed things. It wasn't a house, it was a silo. Concrete, circular, taller than most structures out here, and I'd never seen it listed before. The map gave coordinates, not an address. That's usually a sign to skip the GPS and follow instinct. But as I crested the ridge that marked the edge of the valley, the silo was waiting, perfectly centered in the horizon, like it had been watching me the whole time. There was no path leading to it, no sign it had ever been serviced, but the port was there, half buried in red dust, capped with the standard valve cover we use on outdated tanks. I reversed the truck until the back end kissed the slope, unhooked the hose and began the process. The connection was stubborn. The metal coupler resisted, like the tank inside didn't want to accept what I was giving. I forced it anyway. That's when I noticed the hum. It wasn't mechanical, not the engine, not the pumps. This hum came from the earth itself, deep, resonant, like the sound of pressure beneath rock. It vibrated my teeth, made the air taste metallic. I knelt to adjust the hose, and that's when I saw the mark. It was faint, stamped into the cement just below the port, a triangle, inverted, with a horizontal line cutting through its center. I didn't recognize the symbol, but it made something behind my eyes ache, not a headache, more like a pressure that pulsed in sync with the hum. I looked up. There was something on top of the silo, not a person, not a shadow, just a shape, squatting, watching. It didn't move, but I could feel its attention settle on me like weight pressing between my shoulder blades. My vision narrowed, my legs locked, my body screamed at me to run, but my hands stayed fixed to the hose. Then suddenly, it was gone. Not the figure, the whole silo. One blink, and I was kneeling on empty sand. The hose lay coiled beside me. The truck idled, unaware. No structure, no port, just a dent in the earth, and a haze in the air like heat rising from something recently extinguished. I checked the gauge. Full unload. The tank had emptied, but there was nowhere it could have gone. I didn't report it. I drove straight to the final stop. It was a familiar house. I'd been there once months ago, when I first started. Back then it had been covered in tarps. Every window blacked out. A plastic curtain had hung over the porch, swaying without wind. Now it stood uncovered, exposed. The windows were shattered. The door hung loose on one hinge, and the tarps were gone. But the plastic curtain still swayed, even though there was no breeze. I left the engine running. As I approached, I saw something scrawled across the door in charcoal. It wasn't words. It was a crude image. A hand, fingers outstretched, with a second smaller hand gripping its wrist. Below it, a red smear. Dried, cracked, maybe blood, maybe paint. I didn't want to know. I almost turned back. Then I heard the crying. It came from the basement, soft, layered, like multiple voices trying to cry in unison, but failing to match tone. It wasn't human, not entirely, but it triggered something primal in me, that bone-deep instinct that tells you something helpless is nearby and needs saving. I shouldn't have moved, but I did. I stepped into the house. The floorboards groaned. The air changed. It thickened, as if the house were inhaling me. The crying grew louder with each step. I reached the basement door. It was open. Stairs spiraled downward, not wooden like before, but rusted metal, wet with condensation. The air smelled like copper and rot. I didn't descend. I couldn't. My foot hovered above the first step when the crying stopped. Then came the whisper. It didn't come from below. It came from the walls, from the air, from the ceiling above me. If something in the house sounds like it's suffering, do not enter. It's not suffering. That's Rule 12. The words settled in my chest like smoke. I turned and fled. Outside, the curtain had stopped swaying. The truck's engine had died. The key was still in the ignition, but the battery was drained. I sat in the cab for what felt like hours, staring at the house, watching as the doorway darkened. No figures, just the shadows growing thicker, more substantial, as if something behind them was solidifying. When the truck finally started again, the radio kicked on. White noise, then a voice. My voice, reciting the manifest aloud, line by line, including the silo that no longer existed. I ripped the dial out of the console and drove in silence. Back at the depot, The lights flickered when I entered. The scent had changed. No longer citrus, just something sour and old, like wet towels left in a sealed room. No one greeted me. No one acknowledged my return. I logged the deliveries without comment and left the clipboard in the same bin as always. But when I checked my locker, the phone was gone. In its place was a sheet of paper. On it a single sentence, typed in the same font as the fake manifest from before. "You've almost finished your route. One more delivery remains." The note didn't say where the last delivery was, just that it was still waiting. I stared at the paper for hours, the words shifting in weight every time I blinked. At first it felt like an error, a clerical leftover, but the longer I held it, the more it began to feel personal, like the sentence had been written with a certain knowledge of how far I'd already come, and how far I was still expected to go. My boots felt heavier when I left the depot. Each step dragged as though gravity itself had grown impatient with me. I opened the truck and found a new manifest pinned to the driver's seat. Plain paper, typewritten, same font, same clinical spacing. But this time, the destination wasn't coordinates or an address, just a phrase. "The house that follows you." I didn't know how to process that at first. My hands hovered over the steering wheel, while my mind tried to catalog every location I'd visited, every strange building, every rule, every wrong turn. But none of them had followed me. None of them had moved. At least, not in the way that phrase implied. Then I looked in the mirror, and I saw it. Not far behind the depot, maybe 50 yards into the dunes, was a structure, small, distant, just a silhouette. It hadn't been there when I arrived. I was sure of it, and yet now in the reflection, it was still waiting, like it had always been. I turned around. Nothing, just sand and scrub and heat haze. But when I looked back into the mirror, the house remained, so I drove. At first I tried to outrun it, hit the highway, pressed the gas until the truck screamed beneath me. Dust peeled off the sides in sheets. The sky shimmered like a glass dome ready to crack. I didn't stop for lights, or signs, or even the distant sound of static creeping through the dashboard. I kept going until the engine warned me I wouldn't go much farther. Then I looked in the mirror again. The house was closer, larger. The details had sharpened wooden slats, warped and blackened like they'd been exposed to fire but never fully burned. Windows covered in burlap, a roof that sagged inward, like something heavy had lived inside it for far too long, and the door always ajar, always dark, always facing me. That's when I stopped trying to run. I drove toward it instead. No matter where I turned, how I curved the wheel, how I veered off the road or into dried riverbeds, the house corrected. It stayed in the mirror, always behind me, always at the same distance, unless I dared slow down. It was leading me, guiding me. I was the hose, and the house was the port. I don't know how long I drove. Time fractured. I watched the sun rise and set behind the same ridge twice in 1 hour. Shadows twisted in the wrong direction. Crows flew backward. At one point, I passed a signpost with my own name carved into it, nailed over a weathered warning that read "Unsafe structure. Do not approach." Eventually, the truck stopped. Not because it ran out of fuel. It just gave up. The lights flickered out. The gauges froze. The keys melted into the ignition, like wax pressed into an old seal. I opened the door and stepped out into silence. There was no sound, no wind, no insects, not even the hum that had followed me since the silo. Just stillness. And then I turned around. The house stood 5 feet behind me, close enough that I could see the fibers in the burlap over the windows, close enough that I could smell damp wood and ash, and something older, something sweet and rotting, like fruit left too long on the vine. The door creaked open. I didn't want to go inside, but I did. The interior didn't match the outside. The floor was pristine, polished black wood. The walls were lined with photographs, but the faces were blurred. Each frame buzzed slightly, like they weren't quite real. The air was warmer than it should have been, humid, close pressing, and then I saw the hose. It snaked through the center of the room, uncoiled, waiting. It ended at a hatch in the floor, round and sealed, with the same triangle symbol stamped into its metal. I knew without being told that this was my final delivery. I connected the hose. The hatch groaned open by itself. Beneath it, only darkness. Not stairs, not a basement, just an opening into something that swallowed light. I watched the water surge down the line, vanishing into the black, steam rising where it met whatever waited inside. The air shifted, pressure dropped, the house inhaled, and then it spoke. Not with words, not aloud, but with memory. I saw the moment I first signed the contract, the way the pen had cut my skin. I saw the first delivery I ever made, the one they told me was routine, even though I knew the building was breathing. I saw every rule I'd learned, every mistake I didn't realize I'd made, and every time I came close to breaking something deeper than the laws of the job, something primal. Then I saw the mirror, the one in my bedroom, before I ever took this job, the one that used to show me brushing my teeth, adjusting my collar, forcing a smile before another failed interview. But now it showed me this house, not metaphorically, literally. It had always shown this house, and I'd never noticed. The house hadn't followed me. I had followed it, and then came the whisper. Not from the hatch, not from the hose, but from the walls, the ceiling, the very nails that held the beams together. Once you enter the house, you must complete the delivery. Never walk away before it's done. That's Rule 13. The hatch sealed, the hose retracted, the lights dimmed, but I didn't leave. I stood in the center of the room, staring at the spot where the hatch had been. My reflection stared back from the polished floorboards, but it didn't move when I did. It just watched, patient, expectant, and then the house began to sink. Not collapse, sink. The walls lowered as if melting into the ground. The ceiling dropped. The floor tilted forward. I stumbled, tried to catch my balance, but gravity had reversed. The door was now above me, unreachable, and the hatch was opening again. There was only one place left to go, so I let it take me.